Joyce Slayton of Common Sense Media called it an appealingly silly romp for kids and adults. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader said, "This cruel but effective black comedy violates credibility at almost every turn, but the concept itself is so strong that it winds up working pretty well anyway." And TV Guide referred to it as a modern-day comedy in the grand tradition of the best screwball comedies of the late 1930s and early 40s. On this episode of Ruined Childhoods, we decide the fate of What About Bob?
Sequel. Reboot. Which one will it be?
The Ruined Childhoods Podcast.
I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful. I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful. I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful.
Hey everyone, welcome to Ruined Childhoods.
I feel wonderful.
This is Dan, Dan Weiner, one of your co-hosts, and with me, if John's done repeating his mantra, or rather the mantra of Bob Wiley, he'll say hello.
Dan, I feel good. I feel great. And I feel very wonderful because I'm very excited to talk about What About Bob?
Me too. Very excited.
It's funny because I know that we want to also talk about things that have come up in the reboot, remake, sequel, prequel news sphere, but it's so tempting just to like dive right into it. But I'm gonna hold back. I'm gonna hold back.
So has there been? So what news are you thinking of? Of course, we're on the eve of the release of Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, we are recording this on opening night. I'm seeing it tomorrow. FYI.
Oh, okay. Good to know. That answers that question. I will be seeing it. I don't know when.
I have nothing to say except I'm looking forward to it, and it's going to be a good time, and that's all I care about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. This probably isn't a popular opinion, but I have kind of fallen out of love with the Avengers series. Infinity War kind of did me in. That one tapped me out. By the end of Infinity War, I just felt like, I don't know, I didn't care.
Maybe because Paul Rudd wasn't in it, and Paul Rudd is a delight, and he's going to be in Endgame.
And truth be told, I did really miss Paul Rudd in Infinity War. I don't know that Paul Rudd would have been the difference maker. And I did my Avengers fast, so to speak, was broken when Ant-Man and the Wasp started streaming on Netflix.
Yeah.
So those movies are so much fun. And Michael Pena is such a delight.
He is a delight.
He really is. And just those movies have a different flavor. I love what Peyton Reed has brought to them. And I was thinking about him as a director actually earlier this week as I was trying to hunt down a DVD copy of What About Bob. Uh-huh. I came across quite a few copies of Down with Love.
Oh, Down with Love is great.
And I haven't thought about that movie in a long time. Ewan McGregor and Renee Zellweger. It's never occurred to me how that rhymed. Doing kind of the Doris Day, Rock Hudson pillow talk.
And it works.
Oh, and he nails the style, though. That's what he's really gifted with that. And
don't forget David Hyde Pierce.
David Hyde Pierce is fantastic. It's been such a long time since I've seen it. But I do recall David Hyde Pierce being great in that. Did Peyton Reed also direct Bring It On?
That does sound familiar. I'm not positive, but I think you may be right. I think you're going to go look it up.
Positive
but that we don't have to talk about that because it has nothing to do with the theme of this show, which is the afterlife of movies, whether it be sequel, prequel, reboot, remake, etc. theatrical show, book, comic book, video game, pinball, who knows? There is a new trailer for the Child's Play reboot, which shows a little bit more of the terror that Chucky brings on. And
You see the updated Chucky, right?
And you also get a little taste of Mark Hamill as the voice of Chucky. Just a little taste.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but I will definitely check it out.
I mean, it seems like it's going to be good. I don't know. I never was like super into the original. It certainly made its mark. It's definitely something that everyone is always aware of. So I'm just curious to see how it shakes out. There really isn't much else going on in terms of reboot news. I watched the trailer for The Hustle, which is the Dirty Rotten Scoundrels reboot, which is with Rebel Wilson and why am I blanking on her name?
Oh, Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway. How could I blank on Anne Hathaway's name?
How could you forget? It's New Jersey native Anne Hathaway.
I didn't even know that.
Sister, all right? She's from Millburn.
I didn't. What do I don't have like the directory of New Jersey born actors.
Someone she knows has shopped at Sam's, the store where Mom worked.
Rest in peace, Sam's.
Yeah. I'm going to pour some out for Sam's.
And I don't
pour it out for Sam's.
And I don't know if you've checked that trailer out yet, but it looks like a lot of fun. And I'll say this on the podcast, and I said this to you in a text, but I feel like this would have been one of our ideas for a Dirty Rotten Scoundrels reboot.
Right. Yeah. So, which is, and that does connect us to What About Bob, which was directed by Frank Oz, who also directed Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Frank Oz is one of those other like pivotal directors from, I guess, the 80s and 90s. Definitely, I mean, getting his start with Jim Henson Studios. He was the voice of Yoda as well. So Yoda / Grover, whichever one you choose to associate that voice with. And
Big Bird, you seek Big Bird.
Yeah, so Frank Oz was definitely, he got his start directing with Dark Crystal. Did he also do Follow That Bird? Or was he just the voices of the characters?
And he was also a puppeteer.
He's also a puppeteer.
He wasn't just the voice.
He is also the child of puppeteers.
Yeah, actually born in
Poland?
He was born in Europe. I believe he's Polish. I think he was born in, he might have been born in London. I know he spent some time. Yeah, he was born in England, in Hereford, England. And puppeteers. And he spent some time in Belgium and
never heard of it.
Then Montana. Yeah.
That's a joke because that's where Dan's wife is from.
Yeah. And that's where our wedding was and all that. So let's see what he directed, because if he directed Follow That Bird, that would make this this would make this a very special episode.
That was the first movie I saw in the theater.
Correct.
Making Frank Oz the first director I experienced in the theater.
He did not. No, your first director that you experienced was Mr. Ken Kwapis.
That sounds familiar. What else did he do?
Yes, he directed most recently A Walk in the Woods with Robert Redford and Nick Nolte. Yeah. But he also did quite a few episodes of The Office. And I want to say as a filmmaker, he did The Beautician and the Beast, Dunstan Checks In.
Got it.
He said she said is the one that I associate him with, but he also did Vibes with Jeff Goldblum,
Vibes,
Cyndi Lauper, and
let's add that to the list.
Vibes. That is a hard movie to track down.
Is it really? Well, didn't Jeff Goldblum like try to erase it from history?
I think he succeeded. Like, I can't even, I was going on Spotify because Cyndi Lauper did a track for that film that is pretty dope, and it's called Hole in My Heart.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all the way to China. I had the single, but I was looking for it on Spotify and Amazon Music and could not. Vibes soundtrack, you can't. It apparently does not exist. I think.
Have you checked eBay?
Jeff Goldblum. No, I'm not. I don't. My interest is only that limited,
God.
where I will check the things that I'm like regularly on.
Fair enough.
Are you checking eBay?
I will check eBay for this later.
Wonderful. Okay.
So Frank Oz directed. Getting back to what we're actually talking about here, Frank Oz directed What About Bob? And before we get too far into it, I gotta know, Dan, do you remember the first time you saw this movie?
Of course I do, John.
God.
Yeah. Now, of course, I don't know if I have the ticket stub because I saw this movie at the Westfield Twin Cinema. The Westfield, New Jersey had two movie theaters around the corner from each other. The Twin Cinema was the smaller of the two, and the ticket stubs didn't really have any information printed on them, just like Westfield Cinema and like $2.75 matinee. It had the cheapest matinee price. And that's where I saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I saw Police Academy 6 there. And I saw What About Bob at that movie theater. And I only have one stub from that theater. I have no idea what movie it's from. But I saw that movie and I went with my buddy at the time, Dave Larson, my partner in crime and in amateur filmmaking and fake radio shows.
Right.
Dave Larson and I were actually making we were doing podcasts before it was a thing.
If you can find some of those, we got to release them.
Yeah, I don't know if they exist. Dave, if you're listening, if you know anything. I believe somewhere I do have a Zoli the Hungarian Hero.
Oh, that was the film series. And I say that with quotes. Shot on a PXL 2000.
Right. Yes.
The Fisher-Price video camera.
Brilliant.
So,
yeah, that thing was amazing. But yes, so I remember going to see that, and I think it was in May. Oh, you know what? I remember. I actually remember what I was doing earlier that day.
Oh my God.
and you'll appreciate this, and perhaps a few of our listeners will appreciate this, but I spent my day making some money, making some cash, working for Mr. Alan Rubin at Fashion Finds in Linden.
I did not know that you worked at Fashion Finds.
I pulled a couple of shifts in Fashion Finds, working in the stockroom. Yeah. So yeah, I remember I was, in Linden, and for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, you're used to it by now, but this was a store owned by a friend of the family, and it was discount clothing. I mean, that's, I don't know, for women. I don't think they sold like men's clothing. It was
The only men's clothing were the Fashion Finds swag t-shirts that we all owned.
Oh yeah, definitely. Those could not be bound by gender. So, but I worked at Fashion Finds during the day and then went to see What About Bob that night. I remember laughing so hard that I was like kicking the seat in front of me. And like we both were just like nonstop.
That movie, and I watched it again today, everything, not every line that he says, everything that Bill Murray does is so funny. It's so funny. Just watching him.
Very much. Yes. And what's interesting is that originally cast, it's funny because I remembered, I saw this online, but I also remembered this. I read it in a Premiere magazine. And I think this was not, I don't remember reading it like when I first got the magazine in 1990, but at a certain point when I was sorting stuff out in my old room, at our parents' house, I remember like just flipping through a couple of the magazines and seeing that this movie, What About Bob, was going to be going into production starring Robin Williams and Richard Dreyfuss. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. That would have been different.
Well, yeah, I did read that Robin Williams was the original like choice to play the Bob Wiley role, which I'm sure would have been also great, but definitely different.
Yeah, I wonder. I feel like he would have actually tapped more into the like pathos of the character, which is only really revealed a little bit. But I can only imagine that Robin Williams. I don't know if at that time it was the case, but I mean, Robin Williams knew a thing or two about mental illness.
Right. So, all right, I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of the movie What About Bob in case you are not familiar with it. So What About Bob centers around Bob Wiley, who is a man who lives in New York, and he has a series of emotional disorders that he is trying to treat by seeing a number of therapists. And his, I guess at the beginning of the movie, current therapist has referred him to Dr. Leo Marvin, and is also leaving the business of therapy altogether because of Bob. And Leo Marvin, who's played by Richard Dreyfuss, is this very narcissistic expert in his field and has just written this book called Baby Steps about his methods of therapy. And Bob Wiley goes to his office for his first interview meeting, and Bob clearly is impacted by Leo Marvin and becomes obsessed with him because of that. Leo Marvin is about to leave New York for a month to spend a vacation with his family in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire. And this does not sit well with Bob, so Bob tracks him down, goes to Lake Winnipesaukee in order to continue his treatment. There's no real plan. He just knows that he needs it, and he goes. And he does some very unethical things in order to get there, but he makes his way there. And of course, Dr. Leo Marvin is not happy about this. He's there with his family, which is his wife, Faye, who's played by Julie Haggerty, who is in the Airplane movies. Really, really fantastic actress. And his daughter, Anna, and his son, Siggy, who's played by, I'm blanking on the actor's name, but he was also in Hook.
Charlie Korsmo, also of Dick Tracy.
Right, and Dick Tracy. So
he's the kid.
He is the kid, yeah. He had really quite a moment in the 90s.
90 and 91 were the years, that was the age of Korsmo.
They were very good years for Charlie Korsmo. So
92, not so much.
So Faye, Anna, and Siggy bond with Bob, who is this fun person, which is a stark contrast to their father, who's a very serious person. All he cares about is his upcoming live appearance on Good Morning America, because of his book, Baby Steps. And one thing leads to another. Bob becomes ingrained in this family. They love him. It just makes Leo more irate. And I think we can just leave it at that, because what ends up happening next, I don't want to give anything away in case people still haven't seen it. It came out in 1991. You've had a little bit of time, but it's really something to behold. It's such a great time watching that movie.
You do have to watch it though, keeping in mind, especially like if you're a I guess if you've grown up in the last 15 years, you have to kind of watch it through the lens of what was okay in the early 90s. Because one thing I will say is I know a lot of people, mostly young people, who would watch this and might feel a little offended by kind of the light take on mental illness and emotional disorders. So, I mean, it's with that caveat, and you kind of have to.
Well, yeah, that's something I definitely was going to bring up later on, but yes, it's interesting in that it does deal with emotional disorders, things that people are much more comfortable talking about now. Therapy is another thing that in the early 90s was maybe looked at a little differently than it is now, where it's a very regular thing for people to see therapists, and so much to the point that like there are apps and, places where you can text for therapy. So
it's a healthy thing, and it's considered a healthy thing to do for anyone, really.
Yes. But I will say that there are some interesting moments in What About Bob that kind of, I don't know, they do look at it in a way that is maybe a way to take it a little bit more seriously. It's hard to really pinpoint the subtle moments, but it's not like they're making fun of emotional disorders or therapy in the ways that they could have, or that probably would have been expected of them in 1991.
Well, and we can contrast it or compare it to the 1990 film Crazy People with Dudley Moore and Daryl Hannah, which is set in a home, I guess, for the mentally ill, and draws a lot of its humor from that. I would like to talk about Crazy People again on another episode, because I actually think part of some of the concept of Crazy People is really clever.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Dudley Moore, he plays an advertising, I guess, executive or agent who just kind of like loses it and decides to design all of these like really honest ads. Like, if you watch the trailer, they show a bunch of them. Yeah. Anyway, it's worth checking out. But when I was looking at What About Bob and watching What About Bob again, and I thought of it, it was interesting because we talked about Robin Williams, and there were a few things about it that were reminiscent to me of Mrs. Doubtfire. Where if you just look at the behavior of the individual, it's like there is a problem. There is a form of mental illness, and what the person is doing is not okay. It's not ethical. It's not, and actually Bob goes to much further extremes than what Daniel Hillard does in Mrs. Doubtfire, in my opinion, because Bob gets a prostitute played by Aida Turturro of the Simpsons, Janice of the Simpsons, or not the Simpsons, the Sopranos. Oh my goodness! Like it starts with an S, it ends with an
same
S.
thing.
Whatever heck happens in between. Yeah, Simpsons, Sopranos, practically the same show. Anyway, that's the prostitute that he hires to call the answering service for Dr. Marvin, who's on vacation. This is pre-cell phone, and pretend to be his sister, who he's very protective of. And he's worried that he's worried about her. And then it's Bob calling.
Right.
After Leo has told Bob, like, look, there's another person, like if you have an emergency, they'll put you in touch with this person. He's done the professional thing. Like Leo Marvin might be really self-absorbed and focused on his Good Morning America thing, but he professionally, to a certain extent, he does the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he does the right thing at that point. Once Bob gets there, it's debatable whether Leo does the right thing.
Sure. And I'll also say that Bob also goes to the site of the calling service, telling them that Bob, going disguised as somebody else, but saying that Bob had...
Detective Roberts, NYPD.
that Bob had committed suicide 15 minutes ago, which...
Oh, yeah.
I mean... First of all, it's hilarious that he said 15 minutes ago and then they're already at the calling service. But it's also important to note that is extremely unethical and an awful thing to do.
Like that is real. That's what I'm saying is like somebody who does that. If I'm Leo Marvin and I like I'm at Lake Winnipesaukee and there's Bob Wiley standing in the middle of town, which I remember laughing so hard at this in the theater when he's just standing there shouting, "Dr. Leo Marvin."
Yeah, it's funny.
But if I'm Dr. Marvin in that situation and I'm like, "Oh my God, this guy totally like faked a suicide to get my attention." He should, like, when he takes him to the institution, he takes him to the home. Right. When he's finally like, when he's sick of him, he should have taken him right then and there.
Yeah.
Like this man clearly needed care. And, you know, and of course I'm looking at it not from this is a fun summer comedy point of view. I'm looking at it from a, you know, more realism point of view, which is not the point. But can I bring up a theory?
Ooh, please.
I have to wonder if at some point in the drafting of this screenplay, there was a darker take. And a darker take that Robin Williams not only would have been good at, but in fact was good at when he did something very similar.
Oh, Fisher King?
In 1 Hour Photo.
Oh, no, 1 Hour Photo. Because I was thinking Fisher King because in that he plays a deeply troubled person who has, I mean, PTSD definitely.
Right.
Right. Fisher King is one of my favorite movies. And that one.
Mine as well.
Robin Williams, it's very serious about the way that he depicts somebody who has gone through extreme emotional distress.
Ironically, in a much more like fantasy-based movie, the performance. I could talk about the Fisher King for hours on end. So I adore that movie. That is one of my favorite all-time movies, and has been since the day I saw it. And yes, I remember. But anyway, to get back to my theory, so I'm starting to think as he's doing all this, and I'm watching it from a more, I guess, objective point of view, because I'm watching the movie kind of to analyze it, getting ready to talk about it. And I've seen it a million times prior. So are there hints? Are there hints that he's actually trying to like take over the family? And Leo is so self-absorbed and so focused on himself that he doesn't realize. And I
there is the line when Lily is there, Leo's sister is there, and Leo has gone through a bit of a mental break, and Bob says, "I'll be the dad." Interesting.
That's what I would consider exhibit B, maybe. Exhibit A, he has that line. He says, "If I fake it, I don't have it."
Right. Huh.
And I just thought about that line. And if you reverse it, if I don't have it, I fake it. If I don't have family,
right,
I fake it. And we don't know if the whole story about him having an ex-wife is real. And that was, we might be putting the cart before the horse here, but that was kind of one of my thoughts about a prequel, something about this marriage, perhaps called Life of Wiley. But when you like, because what's the reason he gives for his divorce?
Well, because there are two people in this world, people who like Neil Diamond and people who don't. And she loved Neil Diamond.
This is another question. I wonder, when he says she loved Neil Diamond, I don't know if there was she left him for Neil Diamond or if he's just making this up, because why not? Why not?
You never know with him.
Well, because I just think about that line: if I fake it, I don't have it, and if I don't have it, he doesn't say if I don't have it, I fake it.
And by the way, when he says if I fake it, I don't have it, he's talking about ailments or conditions like Tourette's, which is something that he fakes, or a heart attack, or something that he fakes, because if he fakes it, he doesn't have it. So that's interesting.
Now, the other thing that leads me to believe that is his last name is Wiley, meaning someone who's clever, someone who's scheming, not a lovable, not a buffoon, but not like just this kind of lovable, sad, lonely person, but someone who's wily and someone who, kind of scam
Dan,
artists.
this is very interesting. I am. It's really easy to watch this movie and to not think too much about it, and that's one of the things that makes it a classic.
Right, and you don't think about this unless you are actually sitting down and trying to think about it, which is what I was doing. But it's like Bob is so. Another thing I noticed, so when he's sitting out there with the family and he's talking about how delicious everything is, and Leo goes into the kitchen and Leo starts choking, and it gets bad. The kids get up. He's still talking to Faye, and he's kind of like he's moved over. And then he doesn't get up until she gets up, and he kind of gets up he doesn't actually roll his eyes, but he's like, it's okay. I know what to do.
That's so interesting. I kind of want to watch that again now. By the way,
I mean, maybe
one of the lines that made me laugh so hard watching it this time that I don't even know if I ever really picked up on before is right before that, when he's like, Leo, I see you have salt and pepper. Do you have a salt substitute? I lost it during that. I was like, oh my God, that's so good.
I mean, yeah. And it's funny because there's things like that. And it's like, well, if this man really had anxiety that bad and this bad of a disorder, would he really do all these things? Or, I mean, then you're going into a whole other, but I feel like maybe at some point in the drafting, there was a darker take on this. I mean, we were talking about who's the fool in the movie, because this is our April Fool's. It's Faye. Faye is the fool.
Kind of. The only thing I can think to mention as a rebuttal would be the moments where you see Bob without everybody else, when he's walking down the road and he's hearing the sounds of the night and everything. And it's he's still, got his
whole beginning,
him on the bus. Him walking down his hallway of his building. So
what would really make sense would be a prequel about what happens with him in the previous Doctor.
Well, yeah, that would be interesting. It'd be tough to do a prequel without doing it right at that time, because you couldn't do it with other actors, really.
No.
The one thing I could think would be to re-release it with a different score. Because if you rescore it and keep the music more dark during those moments where it's becoming a little bit more apparent that he is trying to move in on the family, then it can really feel like it is a little bit more diabolical. I don't know. Just a thought.
Kind of like that. Back in the day, this was several years ago, but John actually did this really great recut of Mrs. Doubtfire as a horror movie trailer.
Right. Yeah. That could totally be, if this was maybe recut a little bit, adding a few more pauses when Bob says certain things, maybe those moments could land a little bit more and they could support your theory. So I'm not saying that you're.
It's a wacky theory.
I mean, is it?
Kind of. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's a case, like, unless unless we get an email at ruinedchildhoodspod@gmail.com from someone involved in the film, in the production of the film.
Laura Ziskin, if you're there.
Maybe Laura Ziskin, if you could confirm this. Or
well, one thing that I did read, and I think this is probably the IMDb trivia, but during production, everybody seemed to have a different idea of how things should go. So
yes, I
begs
read
the question, like, was that the way that certain people, like, who knows who, but like certain people would have wanted it to go?
Well, and I think Frank Oz did have kind of a taste for darker. I mean, and if you think about Little Shop of Horrors, which Frank Oz didn't write the ending, but the original ending to the musical is very different and darker than the ending to the movie, but he did shoot the ending, a film adaptation of the way the musical ends. With, spoiler alert, Audrey 2 eats everything and takes over the planet. So I feel like Frank and Dark Crystal actually has some moments that are it's very dark. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised. And it just, like I said before, Robin Williams, not that Bill Murray couldn't do dark, but Robin Williams really could go up to that line and kind of go into that gray area. Where Bob goes, where it's because I think Bob goes there a lot more than Daniel Hillard, his character in Mrs. Doubtfire.
Right. Well, very interesting. Because we're
any other did you have?
Well,
yeah,
I was trying to think of, like, okay, to reboot this movie would be challenging because of the difference in the ways that mental health is viewed in 2019 as opposed to 1991. That said, maybe that would be a good opportunity to right some of the wrongs. And for casting, there's only two people I could possibly think of that could be the stars of it. And
Oscar Isaac
Isaac as both characters. No,
that's the correct answer.
No, for the Dr. Leo Marvin character, Michael Keaton, because he can go from 0 to 100, and you can buy him in any part in that range. He's also just delightful, and who doesn't love Michael Keaton? Other, and actually, I did have two people in mind for that role. The other one was somebody who, as I later found out, was considered for that role, and that would be Kevin Kline.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I read that. Yeah.
But the only person I can think to be Bob Wiley, and as I was watching the movie, every line that Bill Murray said, I could hear it coming out of Zach Galifianakis' mouth.
Okay.
Like, for example,
yeah.
I see salt and I see pepper, but I don't see a salt substitute. Like, that is something that he would say.
Yes.
Everything he says. And it's like, it makes me wonder how much of an influence Bill Murray in the early 90s was on Zach Galifianakis' acting style.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, definitely not on the surface, but that's a really good call. Yeah, so I wasn't thinking. I guess my mind was thinking, either prequels or I was like, what if you rebooted the HBO series In Treatment, but instead of the Gabriel Byrne character, it's Dr. Leo Marvin. Probably not played by Richard Dreyfuss. Right. Maybe it's a young Dr. Leo Marvin. Perhaps it's Kevin Kline. But It's In Treatment with Dr. Leo Marvin.
Dr. Leo Marvin, another great name in cinematic history.
Baby steps to the divorce.
You know, what
Baby
about
steps.
even just, and this was, I think that at the end of the movie, there's kind of a, like, this is what happened to this person kind of thing. But what if they actually did release the book Death Therapy, written by Bob Wiley?
If someone just went and wrote like that book,
Yeah.
like, yeah, a gifted satirist perhaps
Oh, jeez.
would write. Yeah, why not? But yeah, I understand. I feel like the, remaking it would definitely be tough, but yeah, it could be a good opportunity to kind of re-explore mental illness and do it and do it comedically, but also do it with an updated 2019 sensitivity.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
By the way, we got an email from French Fry Phil.
We did. Yes.
Shall I go ahead and read it?
Go right ahead,
Okay,
John.
so Phil, by the way, Phil, thank you for writing. Again, our email address is ruinedchildhoodspod@gmail.com. Phil says, Faye, these episodes are so scrumptious. Hey, thanks, Phil. I know I've been a little MIA with the emails, but great stuff for April Fool's Month. Side note, I've also recently enjoyed a few episodes of Louisa to Beaver. Hey, got it. Hey, and I have a great idea, but I'll never do
Wow.
it. Those are some of my other podcasts.
The entire John Richardson podcasting universe.
If you're not counting the serious ones that I do for my actual job, but my goofing around ones, you bet. So Phil goes,
It's like you're like Mel Brooks in the early 80s. Like you're putting out History of the World Part 1, but also The Elephant Man.
hey, I got range, brother. So then Phil goes, okay, kind of a weird connection, but I still have a large glass jug that I've been stuffing stubs into for movies, amusement parks,
Yeah.
comedians, etc. since 1991. I believe the first one was for Hook, the aforementioned Hook.
I got that one. Got that one.
It's hard to see what's in there these days, but you can make out The Fugitive and Solo in the picture. Also, I shared a bedroom with my two brothers, and my section of the room had movie posters and mini movie posters, in quotes, that were actually ads from my parents' magazines. The first was from Batman Returns. I know that for sure. It all got talked about at some point, but I still have full-size posters of Empire Strikes Back, 3 O'Clock High. Ooh, 3 O'Clock High. That's a good one. And Breaking Away rolled up in a mailing tube. Looking forward to What About Bob? Aside from the original Star Wars trilogy and Willy Wonka, What About Bob was the most rewatched and quoted film for myself and my brothers, maybe tied with Groundhog Day. Ahoy, I sail, Phil. And he attached a photo of the stubs. Phil, with your permission, I'd like to post that on our Instagram at Ruined Childhoods Pod. I'll reach out to you for permission about that one. But thank you for the email.
Awesome.
I always love hearing from you.
Thank you.
And it's
Yeah.
nice to know that, Dan, you have a brother in arms in collecting ticket stubs.
See, I know I'm not alone here.
By the way, another mention about our Instagram account. Dan, yesterday, did an Instagram live going through some of his stubs. And I watched it with my jaw dropped. And my wife, who was next to me, was like, is he still going? And I was like, we're not even halfway through.
It wasn't that long. Was it 5 minutes?
Dan, when you are sitting by yourself going through movie ticket stubs from the 90s, 5 minutes is a pretty long time. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed every second of it, but you crazy, man.
I was describing a lot of, listen, you have one brother who has ticket stubs. You have another brother who collects pizza boxes. So really, who's the
Yours
outlier?
takes up a lot less space.
Facts. I also forgot I had mine for several years. I actually thought I didn't have it anymore. So, yeah. So, yeah, I got my stubs, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. and it just, I feel like I collected them at some point. I said, you know what, I'm going to hang on to these at some point in the future. I'll be glad I did.
And here we are.
You know what? That point was the other day, and continuing on. It's not just one point.
And
it's an
here we are
extended point.
talking about it again. So,
I'm going to keep going.
Do you have any other thoughts about What About Bob before we move on?
So I have to say, first of all, I'm curious to know how close it came to getting a PG-13 with all the Tourette's rants, which that has to be something that's probably got to change, because I feel like since that movie, I've learned about Tourette's and that it very rarely is what is represented in the film.
Well, I feel like that could have been fixed with one line from Leo Marvin saying like, that's not really what Tourette's is, right? And then you're good.
And then the movie would have ended. It's just, I have to, so just to talk a little bit more about Richard Dreyfuss, because when you talk about this movie, Bill Murray, it's hard to not talk about Bill Murray, but Bill Murray's performance would not work so well if Richard Dreyfuss didn't balance him out step by step. And he's got this false modesty that is amazing. He's got this moment when he picks up the phone when they call to tell him that Bob committed suicide, and it's the middle of the night, and he's got this moment where you're like, oh wow, he's really hurt. And then he just goes, let's not let it spoil our vacation, and then claps the lights off with the clapper.
Richard Dreyfuss is great.
What's with the diving?
I was wondering that too, because I never questioned that all the other times I watched it, but it's like, why is he so insistent on teaching his kid how to dive, and why does his kid want to learn how to dive so badly, even though he's so resistant to it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I'm sure there's more in there about like, yeah, he does want to make his father happy. He does want his father's attention. So I guess in that way, Bob is good, because Bob kind of pulls them or drives them more together, I guess.
I think it also gives Leo Marvin an opportunity to accidentally push his son and Bob into the lake, giving them a reason to be on that dock. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess a couple other things. If you were going to update this, another thing that would have to be updated is Faye. And this is not meant to be offensive to Julie Haggerty, who, played the role, but she's written as so submissive. Yes. And so when he's asking her, like, all right, well, what do you prefer? You want like the bust of Freud or the rifle? And she's just like, I don't know. Like, she's afraid to answer him. So there's that, and I guess another element that I think you not only could keep but should keep is the moment when Leo really does handle Bob well. And when he actually, when I'm like, you know what? He really is like, he's good. It's when he tells him to take a vacation from his problems. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And he writes him the prescription. When he writes him that prescription and puts it in a form that he understands by writing a prescription and saying, take a vacation from your problems. I feel like, first of all, that element of the therapy is very much present today. And I think that message is relevant and is actually like good advice. I've given it sometimes to, in adjusted methods, but I've students of mine who've been, who've come to me and been like, I'm stressed out, and I've been like, okay, all right, let's take a vacation from these problems over here. You'll come.
And also, today we'd call that self-care.
Yeah, self-care. But some people need that prescription paper, that Post-it, that reminder that says take a vacation from your problems.
It's really actually great advice.
It really is. As is the baby steps thing. Oh my God, I cited that in a meeting the other day too.
Well,
Kid was really bugging out about taking on writing this big paper, and it's like, I have to do this. I said, no. What do you have to do? What is the next thing you have to do? The next step. Just focus on the next step. Baby steps towards the revision.
It is actual good advice. And
yeah,
I mean, you have to wonder, and I can't recall the name of the screenwriter right now. I know that Laura Ziskin did some deal of the writing on this. She was the producer. Yes. But I wonder how much of that actually comes from actual advice. I don't know.
Alvin Sargent also contributed to the screenplay.
Great name.
He was also a writer on Spider-Man 2, Ordinary People, Paper Moon.
Yeah, and Laura Ziskin, I think, produced some of the Spider-Man movies. So
yeah, she sure did.
I feel like we've covered What About Bob in terms of the theme of this podcast. Ultimately landing on, if you're gonna touch it, it's maybe a responsible thing to take mental health more seriously and to kind of, I don't know, promote therapy in a way that's not making it like an outlier type of thing, which in 2019, it isn't. Yeah.
Correct.
So, should we talk about our next episode?
Our next episode, our next theme. We really enjoyed doing the April Fool's theme for this month, and we're gonna keep it going with next month being May the 4th Be With You month.
But wait, just before everybody makes assumptions that we're going to be talking about Star Wars.
Oh no, those assumptions would do what assumptions tend to do. So I won't go any further.
Yeah.
You smell what I'm cooking. So we will not be discussing Star Wars. We will instead be talking about the fourth parts in series,
franchises,
in film series, franchises.
So our next episode is going to be Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol.
Citizens on Patrol.
Okay. I know that we've talked about this at one point in another episode, but Dan and I love the Police Academy movies, unapologetically. Safe to say?
And Scott well.
Scott as well, yes. And
yeah, he may claim he doesn't remember watching them, but we watched all 7 of them a few years back in a marathon. We had a drinking game.
Did you also watch the unofficial Police Academy movie Ski Patrol?
No, I don't remember the last time I saw that.
Well, when we
I do remember the first time.
All right, so Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol next time. And Dan, I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful.
I feel great.
I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful.
John, I'm going to go take a vacation from my problems.
I feel good. I feel great. I feel wonderful.
We're singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling. I'm happy again. I walk through the kitchen with a bowl full of chicken. And I put it in Fan Leo. I mean Dr. Marvin's refrigerator for the night.
I don't like being a party poop, but tomorrow's very important, and we better call it a night.
I don't want to be rude, but maybe it's time for Bob to sing his way home.
Honey, he can't walk home in this.
Did I say that? I'll drive him.
Oh, Dad, the car's still at the marina.
What?
You said to leave it, remember?
Well, rain's got to let up soon. He can go home then.
Well, what if it starts up again?
He can borrow my slicker.